Welcome to Revenge with Lyra.
Dad came to take my son for the weekend. He opened the fridge. Empty. Sweetheart, you earned $300,000. Why is your child hungry? He asked. My husband came out proudly and said, I gave her salary to my mother. Dad stayed silent, took off his jacket, and did something that reminded me why I love him most. My name is Lila Carter, I'm 31. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Have you ever watched respect drain from someone's face? Not because of words, but because of truth they can't deny? The air in the kitchen was thick, almost metallic. Dad's jaw tightened as his eyes swept over the bare shelves, the single bottle of milk, the leftovers wrapped in plastic like a secret. My son, Ben, peeked from behind my leg, clutching his stuffed fox. Is this true? Dad asked quietly. I wanted to lie, to protect whatever was left of my marriage. But the silence between my husband and me answered for me. He shrugged. It's not a big deal. My mom needed it. She's family. Dad's voice dropped an octave. And what about this family? My husband laughed, actually laughed, and leaned against the counter. You wouldn't understand. Some of us respect our parents. Dad's gaze sharpened. Respect isn't obedience, son. It's responsibility. Then he turned to me. Go pack Ben's bag. I blinked. What? Pack it, he said firmly. He's coming with me. Something inside me trembled. Not from fear, but from recognition. I'd seen that tone before, when Dad used to stand up for Mom during those rare, quiet wars in our old house. As I zipped Ben's backpack, my husband muttered, You're not taking him anywhere. Dad didn't argue. He just reached for his phone, made one call, and by the time the police cruiser pulled up, my husband wasn't smiling anymore. When the officers left, the house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator, the same empty fridge that had exposed everything. Dad rolled up his sleeves and opened his wallet. Go get your son something real to eat, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, which somehow hurt more. My husband stood by the window, arms crossed. You didn't have to call the police. That was dramatic. Dad looked at him, calm but deadly serious. You stole from my daughter and let your child go hungry. I should have called a judge instead. I stood there frozen between them, guilt and relief mixing like oil and water. Dad took a slow breath, then did something unexpected. He started unloading groceries from the trunk of his car. Bags of food, milk, fresh fruit, even my son's favorite cereal. Sit, he told me. You haven't eaten either, have you? I shook my head. He cooked while humming the same tune he used to whistle when I was little. Within minutes, the kitchen smelled like butter and warmth instead of fear. He placed a plate in front of Ben and said, A man who feeds others never lets his family starve. My husband mumbled, You're making me look bad. Dad turned to him. You did that yourself. Then he opened his briefcase, pulled out a folded paper, and slid it across the counter. You wanted control? Fine. Sign this. Financial disclosure. Every cent you spend from her salary goes on record. My husband's face paled. You can't be serious. I'm more than serious, Dad said, folding his jacket neatly over the chair. I'm her father. And today, I'm reminding you what that means. Ben giggled softly, spooning cereal. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel hollow. By evening, the tension sat thick in the living room like fog. My husband paced, muttering under his breath, while Dad sat calmly on the couch, legs crossed, sipping tea as if this were a casual visit and not a full-blown reckoning. Look, Mr. Carter, my husband began, forcing a smile. You don't understand. My mother's alone. She needed the money for her medical bills. Dad looked up. Then you should have worked for it, not stolen it from your wife's paycheck while your son starved. His tone was even, but the silence that followed cracked like thunder. I spoke quietly. I didn't even know my direct deposit was being rerouted. He changed the email and password on the joint account. Dad turned his gaze to my husband. That true? No response. Just that familiar twitch at the corner of his mouth, guilt dressed as arrogance. Dad sighed, stood, and reached into his briefcase again. Then this will make things simpler. He placed a set of documents on the coffee table, printed bank statements, a notarized letter from his accountant, and a draft motion for financial abuse. I called a friend from the county office. You've been draining $14,000 every quarter from her salary for the past year. All traceable. All recoverable. My husband's voice broke. You wouldn't. I would, Dad interrupted. But only if you don't fix it yourself. He walked over to me, his voice soft now. Lila, you'll transfer your paycheck into a new account tomorrow morning. I'll help you set it up. Separate everything. For a moment, I couldn't speak. This wasn't just protection, it was proof that someone still saw me. As Dad gathered his papers, my husband whispered, "You're destroying our marriage." Dad didn't even look back. "No, son. You did that when you confused control with love." The front door closed behind him, and for the first time in years, I felt the air shift, heavy turning to clean. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, slicing the room into lines of gold and truth. I sat at the table, Dad's documents spread out before me, a roadmap to freedom disguised as paperwork. My husband stumbled in, hair disheveled, eyes red from a sleepless night. "You called your father on me," he said, voice brittle. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I looked up from the forms. "You're humiliated because you got caught, not because you did wrong." He leaned forward, fists pressing the table. "You're blowing this out of proportion. I helped my family. You should respect that." I met his stare. And who respected mine? Who respected our son when he asked for breakfast, and I had to lie? He looked away, no answer. At 9 a.m., Dad's SUV pulled up outside. He stepped out with quiet precision, holding coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. "Ready?" he asked me through the open door. My husband scoffed. "You really think you can take her money now?" Dad didn't even glance his way. "No. I'm helping her take it back." We drove downtown in silence, the city waking around us. At the bank, Dad introduced himself to the branch manager, apparently an old friend. Within 30 minutes, I had a new account, separate credit line, and legal protection filed. Dad waited patiently through every signature, his calm like a shield. When it was done, he looked at me and said softly, "Don't apologize for being smart, Lila. You just needed someone to remind you it's okay to use it." That evening, when my husband came home, the house felt different. The air wasn't tense, it was mine again. On the counter, I left a note. "My money feeds my child, not your pride." And for once, I didn't wait for his reaction. By the weekend, the silence in our house had changed shape. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was purposeful, like the calm before rebuilding. Ben colored quietly at the table while I sorted through months of neglected bills and credit statements. Every paper I picked up felt like a confession I'd been forced to live through. Dad came by again, this time without warning. He stepped inside, looked around, and nodded approvingly at the boxes labeled mine. "You've started packing," he said. "I'm not sure where yet," I admitted. "But I can't stay here." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to know where. You just need to know you're leaving." Before I could respond, my husband's car pulled into the driveway. His door slammed, footsteps quick. He came in, eyes flicking between Dad and me. "You're turning my son against me," he snapped. "You think your father's some kind of hero?" Dad didn't flinch. "No. I'm just a man who doesn't let cowards hide behind excuses." My husband's voice rose. "You don't understand marriage." "Maybe not yours," Dad replied, "but I understand decency." He took a slow step closer, lowering his tone. "If you cared about your family, you'd have filled that fridge before running to your mother." The words hung there. Even my husband's anger couldn't cut through them. He backed away, muttering curses, and stormed out the door. When the sound of his car faded, Dad turned to me and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "This isn't the end, Lila. It's the beginning of you becoming the parent Ben deserves." Ben looked up from his drawing and smiled. "Grandpa, are you staying for dinner?" Dad chuckled. "I brought groceries this time, kiddo. Let's make something special." And for the first time in months, dinner didn't taste like survival. It tasted like home. By Monday, I'd made my decision. I filed for separation. It wasn't a dramatic scene, just quiet signatures on thick paper and the feeling of chains snapping link by link. Dad drove me to the courthouse, Ben's laughter echoing in the back seat as he held a juice box like victory. Inside, the clerk stamped the forms without ceremony. "You'll get your preliminary hearing date within 2 weeks," she said. Dad thanked her, then turned to me. "How do you feel?" I hesitated.
Free.
Terrified. Both. He smiled. "That means you're doing it right." Back home, the house felt hollow, furniture still in place, but energy gone. My husband had taken some of his clothes and a few electronics. Everything else, he left behind, as if abandoning the weight of his choices. I spent that night sorting the kitchen cabinets. Cans lined up neatly. Fresh groceries stacked where emptiness used to live. When Ben woke for water, he blinked at the shelves. "Mommy, it's full." "Yeah, baby," I whispered. "It's full again." Later, I sat by the window with tea, scrolling through messages from coworkers and friends, women who had seen my quiet posts about financial control and reached out privately. "You're brave. You gave me courage to confront my husband. Can you help me set up my own account?" I typed replies one by one. When Dad called that night, his voice was soft. "Your story's helping more people than you know." I looked at Ben asleep on the couch, his hand still holding his toy fox. "It's helping me too," I said. Outside, streetlights glowed against the glass, steady, unshaken, like a promise. Tomorrow, I'd start over. Not as someone's daughter. Not as someone's wife. Just as Lila, enough on her own. The following week, I met Dad downtown for lunch. He was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through his phone with that half-smile he wore when pretending not to worry. "Court date came in?" he asked. I nodded. 2 weeks from Friday. "He's contesting custody, but my lawyer says it's a weak case. He doesn't even have a stable job now." Dad folded his menu. That's what happens when people build empires on someone else's paycheck. We ordered sandwiches, and halfway through the meal, he leaned back. "You know, when you were 16, I used to wonder if you'd ever see yourself the way I did, sharp, patient, unbreakable. I guess I have my answer." I smiled, blinking back tears. "You saw me long before I did." After lunch, I walked through the city alone. Everything looked sharper, more real. Even the sound of traffic felt like life returning. I stopped at a toy store and bought Ben a small globe. "So you can see the world's bigger than one house," I'd tell him later. That night, when I came home, I found an envelope slid under the door. My husband's handwriting. Inside, a check for $10,000 and a single note. "I'm sorry. Mom was wrong. I was wrong. I'll sign whatever you want." I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper. Not out of pity, out of closure. When Dad called that night, I read him the note. He was quiet for a while, then said, "He's not apologizing to you, Lila. He's surrendering to the woman he never thought you'd become." I smiled into the silence, then let him. Because forgiveness wasn't a door he could walk through. It was one I had already closed. 2 months later, the court hearing came and went quietly. My husband didn't contest. He signed full custody to me, handed over the house keys, and left the courtroom without looking back. No grand speeches, no last words, just silence, the kind that tells you a storm has finally passed. Outside, Dad was waiting by his old Chevy. "You're officially free," he said, slipping his arm around my shoulders.
Free.
The word tasted new, like something I hadn't earned before, but had finally grown into. That night, I stood in the kitchen with Ben, baking cookies, something simple, warm, ours. He asked if Grandpa would live with us forever. I smiled. "He'll always be close, baby. Always." When Ben went to bed, I sat by the window again, the same spot where months ago I'd stared at an empty fridge and felt like disappearing. Now the lights outside shimmered, and the reflection in the glass wasn't a woman defeated by betrayal, but one rebuilt by truth. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it. You didn't let them break you, you showed them how to stand again." I typed back, "You taught me how." Across the room, the new job offer sat printed on the counter, a leadership role in a media firm that had followed my story online. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl once mocked for not handling a paycheck now teaching others how to handle their worth. I closed the lights and whispered to the quiet house, "We're enough now, Ben." Somewhere deep inside, the little girl who once feared her father's disappointment and her husband's disapproval finally exhaled. Because in the end, it wasn't the apology or the money or even the freedom that healed her. It was knowing she'd never let anyone make her small again.